The days blurred into weeks, and while the ache from Kaito's failed confession still lingered, it had become a manageable presence in his life, no longer the sharp, stinging pain it once was. Instead, it settled into the background, a faint echo he could ignore most days. What surprised him most wasn't how the pain had lessened, but how quickly someone new had stepped into the void it left behind. Aiko. At first, Kaito wasn't sure what to make of her. Aiko was the complete opposite of Hana. Where Hana was serene and composed, Aiko was lively and unpredictable. She had a way of barging into his life with her bright smiles and endless energy, her pink ponytail bouncing as she spoke with a confidence that was almost magnetic. She didn't tiptoe around his mood or hesitate to tease him, which was refreshing, even if it left him off balance. With Hana, everything had always felt careful and deliberate. He'd known her since they were kids, and every interaction carried the weight of that history. She was like sunlight on a calm day, warm, steady, and familiar. But now, that light seemed distant, and Kaito couldn't help but feel the shadow of her rejection every time they crossed paths. The ease he once felt around her had been replaced with a tension he didn't know how to fix. Aiko, on the other hand, was like the spark of a firecracker, unexpected, bold, and fleetingly bright. She didn't seem to care about his guarded nature, brushing past his walls as if they weren't there at all. She pulled him into conversations he would have never started, coaxed him into laughing at things he might have ignored, and made the world around him feel just a little more colorful. Still, it was impossible not to compare them. Aiko was so new, so unfamiliar, and that scared him. With Hana, he had years of shared memories to lean on, a bond built over time and countless small moments. Aiko had only known him for a few weeks, yet somehow she already understood him in ways that felt unnervingly deep. She noticed things about him, like how he always sat near the edge of the rooftop to sketch, or how he avoided eye contact when he was embarrassed, and she brought those observations into their conversations with casual ease. "Why are you always so serious?" she had asked him one day, her voice teasing but not unkind. "I'm not serious," he'd muttered, flushing under her scrutiny. "You totally are," she'd said, laughing, "but it's okay. I'll teach you how to lighten up." Her words had stuck with him. He didn't know if it was her confidence or her optimism, but there was something about Aiko that made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to carry the weight of everything on his own. And yet, there were moments when his thoughts drifted back to Hana. He wondered if she noticed the distance growing between them, or if she even cared. Part of him still longed for her approval, for the ease of their old friendship. But every time he thought of her smile as she turned him down, that longing twisted into something heavier, something that made it harder to meet her gaze in the hallway. One afternoon, as Kaito walked home, he caught sight of Hana across the street. She was chatting with a group of her friends, her laughter ringing out like a melody. For a moment, he paused, watching her from a distance. She seemed happy, radiant as always, and he couldn't help but wonder if his absence had made any difference to her at all. Then, as if sensing his gaze, Hana glanced in his direction. Their eyes met briefly, and Kaito saw something flicker across her face, something he couldn't quite place. She looked away quickly, turning back to her friends, but the moment left him unsettled. When he reached his house, his phone buzzed with a message from Aiko. "Aiko, rooftop tomorrow? I'm bringing snacks." Kaito stared at the screen, a small smile tugging at his lips despite the heaviness in his chest. He typed back a quick reply. "Sure." As he set the phone down, Kaito realized that while he didn't know what the future held, one thing was clear. Aiko was becoming a part of his world in ways he hadn't expected. And for now, he was okay with that. The shrill sound of the school bell signaled the end of morning classes, and Kaito stretched his arms as he stood, his joints popping after hours spent hunched over his desk. Ren, always full of energy, slung his bag over his shoulder and leaned casually against Kaito's desk, grinning. "Lunch?" Ren asked, already knowing the answer. "Yeah," Kaito replied with a nod, tucking his sketchbook into his bag. "The usual spot?" Ren gave him a mock salute. "Lead the way, boss." Just as the two were about to leave the classroom, Hana appeared in the doorway, her golden hair catching the sunlight streaming in from the windows. Her radiant smile was as effortless as always, but Kaito couldn't help but feel a faint pang of unease whenever she was near lately. He wasn't sure if it was the lingering sting of her rejection or the distance that had grown between them. "Kaito, Ren!" she called, waving as she approached them. "Heading to lunch?" "Yep," Ren said, his grin widening. "Care to join us, Your Majesty?" Hana rolled her eyes playfully but looked expectantly at Kaito. "What about you? Eating with us today?" Kaito hesitated, scratching the back of his neck. "Actually, I can't today. I have other plans." Hana's brow furrowed slightly, though her smile didn't waver. "Other plans? Since when do you have other plans?" Ren, ever the instigator, smirked. "Oh, you mean with the mystery girl?" Kaito shot him a glare. "Ren, mystery girl," Hana repeated, tilting her head in confusion. "Who are you talking about?" Before Kaito could respond, Ren leaned closer to Hana, mock whispering, "You know, the pink-haired girl, the one he's been sneaking off to hang out with. I think our boy's got himself a new friend." Hana's expression shifted just for a moment, as if she were caught off guard. "Pink hair? I've seen her around. She's loud." Ren chuckled. "Loud and bold. Unlike some people, she doesn't leave Kaito hanging." "Ren?" Kaito snapped, his voice sharper than intended. Hana opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a cheerful voice cut through the tension. "Hey, Kaito!" Aiko appeared, her pink ponytail swaying as she waved enthusiastically. She approached their group with her usual easy confidence, carrying her bento in one hand and a cheerful grin on her face. Her bright blue eyes sparkled with curiosity as she glanced at Ren and Hana. "Am I interrupting?" Aiko asked, her tone teasing but polite. Kaito felt his face heat up under the sudden scrutiny. No. These are my friends, Ren and Hana." "Nice to meet you," Aiko said, bowing slightly before looking at them with a wide grin. "I'm Aiko." Ren returned the grin, clearly amused. "Ah, so you're the famous Aiko. Kaito talks about you all the time." "Ren," Kaito groaned, burying his face in his hands. Hana's smile was polite but noticeably strained. "Nice to meet you too," she said. "So, you're the one Kaito's been hanging out with." "That's me," Aiko said cheerfully. "And you're Hana, right? I've heard a lot about you too." The air grew noticeably thicker, though Aiko didn't seem to notice. She turned to Kaito, her smile softening. "Ready to head to the rooftop?" Before Kaito could respond, Ren clapped his hands together. "Actually, why don't we all go? You know, a little group lunch date. It'll be fun." Aiko's eyes lit up. "The more the merrier. I was going to suggest it anyway." Hana hesitated, glancing at Kaito, but nodded. "Sure, why not?" With that, the four of them made their way to the rooftop. Kaito walked ahead with Aiko, who chatted animatedly, while Ren and Hana trailed slightly behind. Ren leaned toward Hana, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Jealous, huh?" he teased, smirking. "Not a good look on you, Hana." Hana's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Instead, she kept her gaze on Kaito and Aiko, her mind swirling with emotions she couldn't quite untangle. As they reached the rooftop, the warm afternoon breeze swept over them, carrying the faint scent of the nearby cherry blossom trees. Aiko immediately moved to her usual spot near the edge of the rooftop, laying out a small cloth from her bag to sit on. She patted the space beside her, motioning for Kaito to join her. He hesitated, glancing at Ren and Hana. "Come on, Kaito," Aiko called, her grin as bright as the sky above. "I didn't bring snacks for nothing." Ren, ever the opportunist, plopped himself down beside Aiko before Kaito could react. "What kind of snacks are we talking about?" he asked, peering into her bag. "Ren," Kaito exclaimed, exasperated. He moved to sit across from them as Aiko laughed. "It's just some sandwiches I made this morning," she said, pulling out individually wrapped sandwiches and passing them around. "Nothing fancy, but they're good." Hana lingered by the doorway for a moment before reluctantly joining them, sitting beside Kaito but keeping her distance from Aiko. She accepted the sandwich Aiko offered her with a polite nod, though her grip on it seemed a little tighter than necessary. "So, Aiko," Ren began, taking a large bite of his sandwich, "where are you from? You just transferred here, right?" "Yep," Aiko said, chewing quickly to answer. "My family moved here a few weeks ago. My dad's job keeps us moving around a lot, so I've gotten used to being the new kid." "Must be tough," Ren said, genuinely curious. "Sometimes," Aiko admitted, shrugging, "but I like meeting new people, so it's not all bad. Like today, this is fun. I didn't expect Kaito's friends to be so welcoming." Hana's lips twitched into a faint smile, though her eyes stayed trained on her sandwich. It's nice to meet you too, she said softly. Aiko beamed. Thanks. And I'm glad to finally meet you guys. Kaito's mentioned you a lot. Ren raised an eyebrow, grinning. Oh, has he now? What kind of stuff has he been saying? Kaito groaned. Ren, stop. Aiko laughed. Just that you're his best friend and a bit of a troublemaker. Pretty spot on, I'd say. Ren chuckled, leaning back on his hands. I like her already. Hana glanced at Kaito, her expression hard to read. And what about me? She asked, her voice light but carrying an undercurrent of something deeper. Aiko hesitated, her smile faltering for the briefest moment. He said you're really important to him. I can see why. Kaito shifted uncomfortably, his gaze fixed on the rooftop tiles. Hana's cheeks colored slightly, but she didn't respond, her hands fidgeting in her lap. Ren, sensing the tension, clapped his hands together. All right, since we're all getting to know each other, how about a game? What kind of game? Kaito asked warily. Ren grinned mischievously. A classic, 2 truths and a lie. It's perfect for breaking the ice. Aiko's eyes lit up. I'm in. Fine, Kaito said reluctantly. Hana nodded silently, her gaze flickering between Kaito and Aiko. As they played, the group began to relax, laughter and light-hearted teasing filling the rooftop. Aiko's bold personality kept the mood lively, while Ren's quick wit ensured there was never a dull moment. Even Hana, who had remained quiet at first, gradually joined in, her usual composed demeanor softening. Still, Kaito couldn't shake the subtle undercurrent of tension. Every time he caught Hana's gaze, there was something there, something he couldn't quite place. Meanwhile, Aiko's unrelenting energy continued to draw him in, her presence like a whirlwind pulling him out of his usual solitude. As the lunch period ended, the group gathered their things and began heading back downstairs. Aiko fell into step beside Kaito, chatting animatedly about a new movie she wanted to see. Ren and Hana followed behind, the latter unusually quiet. Looks like Kaito's got a new bestie, Ren said teasingly, glancing at Hana. You okay with that? Hana didn't respond immediately. She watched Aiko laugh at something Kaito said, her expression unreadable. If he's happy, then I'm happy, she said finally, though her voice lacked conviction. Ren frowned slightly but didn't press further. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, Hana lingered for a moment, her gaze following Kaito and Aiko as they walked ahead. For the first time, she felt the edges of something unfamiliar, something uncomfortably close to jealousy. The school day passed in a blur, and as the final bell rang, Kaito gathered his belongings, preparing to head home. His thoughts lingered on the rooftop lunch and the way Aiko's laughter had lightened the mood. It was strange how quickly she had slipped into his life, filling spaces he didn't realize were empty. Kaito! Aiko's familiar voice called out, snapping him from his thoughts. He turned to see her jogging toward him, her pink ponytail bouncing with each step. She stopped in front of him, catching her breath. Hey, she said with a grin. Walk me home? Kaito blinked, caught off guard. Sure. Where do you live? Not too far, she said. We can just talk on the way. I need some advice, and you seem like a good person to ask. Advice? Kaito echoed as they started walking. About what? Aiko tilted her head thoughtfully. About fitting in here. I mean, I'm pretty good at making friends, but you've been around longer. You've got the inside scoop. Kaito couldn't help but smile at her confidence. I don't know if I'm the best person for that, he admitted. I'm not exactly popular. That's what makes you perfect, she said, her voice bright. You're real. No fake smiles or trying to impress people. I like that about you. Her words struck a chord, and Kaito felt his cheeks warm. Thanks, he muttered, unsure how to respond. They walked in companionable silence for a while, the sound of their footsteps blending with the distant hum of traffic. Aiko glanced at him, her blue eyes thoughtful. So what's the deal with you and Hana? She asked suddenly. Kaito stiffened. What do you mean? Aiko shrugged. It's just, you two seem close, but there's this weird tension. Did something happen? Kaito hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. We've been friends for a long time, he said finally, but things are different now. Aiko raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Well, for what it's worth, I think she cares about you. Maybe more than she realizes. Kaito looked at her, surprised. What makes you say that? Just a feeling, Aiko said with a playful smile. Call it a girl's intuition. Meanwhile, Hana sat at her desk, her homework untouched as her thoughts drifted back to lunch. Seeing Kaito with Aiko had stirred something within her, a nagging discomfort she couldn't shake. She thought back to his confession, the way he had looked at her with such vulnerability. She hadn't meant to hurt him, but in rejecting his feelings, had she also pushed him away? Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. It was a message from Ren. "Ren, want to grab some snacks? You look like you could use a pick-me-up." Hana sighed, typing back a quick reply. "Sure. Where?" Ren's response came almost immediately. "Convenience store by the park. Be there in 10. At the store, Hana found Ren browsing the candy aisle. He greeted her with a grin, holding up a bag of gummy bears. "These always cheer me up," he said. "Figured you might need some too." Hana managed a small smile. "Thanks, Ren." As they walked back toward the park, Ren glanced at her out of the corner of his eye. "So, what's up with you and Kaito?" Hana tensed. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean," Ren said, his tone unusually serious. "You've been acting weird since he started hanging out with Aiko." "I'm not acting weird," Hana said defensively. "I'm just adjusting." Ren smirked. "Adjusting to what? The idea that someone else might be important to him?" Hana didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the ground. Ren sighed, his teasing replaced with a rare moment of sincerity. "Look, Hana, I know you care about Kaito, even if you won't admit it. But if you don't figure out what you want, someone else might take your place." Hana's chest tightened at his words, but she remained silent. As they reached the park, she watched the sun dip below the horizon, her thoughts a tangled mess. Later that afternoon, while Ren and Hana were out at the convenience store, Kaito and Aiko found themselves walking through a quiet park not far from the school. The sun was dipping lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the cobblestone paths. Aiko had coaxed Kaito into going out for fresh air after class, armed with her ever-present enthusiasm and a bag of snacks she had somehow convinced him to carry. "Come on, Kaito, lighten up," Aiko said, skipping ahead of him and spinning around to face him. Her pink ponytail swung with the motion, and her bright blue eyes sparkled with mischief. "You're walking like this is some funeral procession," Kaito sighed, a small, reluctant smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe I'm just not used to being dragged around." "Dragged? This is a premium hangout experience," Aiko teased, holding her arms out dramatically. "You should be thanking me." Kaito shook his head, but he couldn't suppress a quiet chuckle. "Fine. Thanks for the premium experience." "That's more like it," Aiko said, grinning. She pulled a small package of crackers from her bag and held it out to him. "Here, payment for your hard work." He accepted the snack with a faint smile, the weight on his chest feeling a little lighter. They wandered toward a small fountain in the center of the park, where Aiko plopped down on the edge and patted the spot beside her. "All right, Mr. Serious," she said, leaning back and looking up at the sky. "Out with it." "Out with what?" Kaito asked, sitting down reluctantly. "Whatever's been eating at you," Aiko said, turning to face him. "I mean, I know you're not exactly the open up and share type, but you've been carrying something heavy ever since I met you, and I'm pretty sure it's not just bad posture." Kaito's expression faltered, and he looked away, his fingers tightening around the snack package. "It's nothing." "Liar," Aiko said lightly. She nudged his shoulder. "Come on, Kaito. You don't have to spill your deepest, darkest secrets, but let me in a little, yeah? I promise I won't judge." For a moment, Kaito stayed silent, the words caught in his throat. But something about Aiko's presence, the way she seemed to genuinely care, without expecting anything in return, made him feel like maybe, just maybe, it was okay to let his guard down. "It's Hana," he admitted quietly. "We've been friends forever, but I told her how I felt. About her, and she said she didn't feel the same." Aiko's expression softened, her playful demeanor giving way to something more serious. "That must have been really hard." "It was," Kaito said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But what's worse is how things are now. I thought we'd still be okay, but everything's different. I can't even talk to her without feeling like I'm not enough." He stared at the ground, his shoulders slumping under the weight of his own words. "I don't know. Maybe I'm just not good at letting go." Aiko was quiet for a moment, and Kaito braced himself for a response he didn't think he wanted to hear. But when she spoke, her voice was gentle. "Kaito, you're not enough. You're just you. And if she couldn't see how amazing that is, then that's on her, not you. Her words hit him like a jolt, unexpected and powerful. He looked at her, his dark eyes wide with disbelief. You really think that? I do, Aiko said firmly. You're kind, talented, and way funnier than you give yourself credit for. And yeah, you've got your walls up, but who doesn't? That doesn't make you less. Kaito felt his throat tighten, the unfamiliar warmth of her words spreading through him. Thanks, Aiko, he said, his voice rough with emotion. That means a lot. Aiko smiled, her blue eyes twinkling. Anytime. That's what friends are for. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Kaito felt something shift inside him. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel like he was carrying everything alone. And though the ache from Hana's rejection hadn't disappeared, it no longer felt insurmountable. With Aiko by his side, he began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he could start to heal. The sun had nearly disappeared below the horizon when Aiko stood, brushing crumbs off her skirt. Well, she said, stretching her arms above her head, I should probably get going before it gets too dark. My mom will think I got lost again. Kaito rose as well, a small smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Again? Hey, navigating a new neighborhood is hard, Aiko said, puffing her cheeks in mock indignation. But at least now I have my own personal guide, right? I don't remember signing up for that, Kaito said, his tone dry but playful. Aiko laughed, the sound bright and infectious. Too late, you're stuck with me. As they walked toward the park exit, Aiko glanced sideways at Kaito. Thanks for today, by the way. I know I can be a little much. Kaito shook his head, surprised by her words. You're not. Honestly, I think you're exactly what I needed. Aiko beamed, and for a moment, Kaito felt like the weight on his chest had lightened even more. When they reached the intersection where their paths split, Aiko waved cheerfully. See you tomorrow? She asked. Yeah, Kaito said, nodding. See you tomorrow. As she disappeared down the street, Kaito lingered for a moment, staring after her. He couldn't quite put it into words, but something about Aiko made him feel seen in a way he hadn't experienced before. It was new and strange, but not unwelcome. Meanwhile, at the convenience store, Hana and Ren stood near the register, Ren tossing a bag of chips in the air and catching it repeatedly. You're quiet, Ren said, eyeing Hana as she stared at the shelves in front of her. More than usual. Hana didn't answer immediately, her mind replaying the rooftop lunch and the easy camaraderie between Kaito and Aiko. It had bothered her more than she wanted to admit, and she hated that she couldn't figure out why. I'm just thinking, she said finally, reaching for a drink and adding it to her basket. About Kaito and Aiko? Ren asked bluntly, his smirk reappearing. Hana's head snapped toward him. Why would you think that? Because you've been staring holes into the floor ever since we left, Ren said, shrugging. It's pretty obvious, you know. You're jealous. I'm not jealous, Hana said, though her voice lacked conviction. I don't want him to get hurt again. Ren raised an eyebrow. Is that really it? Hana hesitated, her fingers tightening around the basket handle. I don't know, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to lose him. Ren's smirk softened into something more thoughtful. You don't have to lose him, Hana. But if you keep waiting, someone else might take the spot you didn't know you wanted. Hana didn't respond, her chest tightening at his words. She paid for her items in silence, her mind swirling with emotions she couldn't untangle. The next morning, Kaito arrived at school feeling lighter than he had in weeks. Aiko's words had stayed with him, their warmth lingering like an ember in the back of his mind. He was even smiling faintly as he opened his locker, until he noticed Hana standing nearby, waiting for him. Morning, she said, her voice hesitant. Morning, Kaito replied, his smile fading slightly as unease crept in. Do you have a minute? Hana asked, shifting on her feet. I wanted to ask you something. Kaito glanced at the clock, then nodded. Sure. What's up? Hana hesitated, her green eyes flickering with uncertainty. I was wondering if you wanted to hang out after school today, like old times. Kaito blinked, caught off guard. Before he could respond, a cheerful voice interrupted them. Morning, Kaito. Hana? Aiko approached with her usual energy, her pink ponytail bouncing. She stopped beside Kaito, grinning as she held up a notebook. Ready for class? Hana's smile tightened, and Kaito felt the tension between the two girls immediately. He glanced between them, unsure how to navigate the moment. Actually, Hana was just asking if I wanted to hang out later, Kaito said, scratching the back of his neck. Really? Aiko said, her tone curious but light. That sounds fun. Maybe we could all do something together? Hana's jaw tightened slightly, but she forced a smile. Maybe another time. I don't want to intrude. Kaito hesitated, sensing the undercurrent of tension. We can figure something out, he said quickly, trying to defuse the situation. Aiko, oblivious to the shift in mood, patted Kaito's shoulder. Well, let me know. I've got some ideas for snacks. As she walked away, Hana turned to Kaito, her expression unreadable. You seem close with her. Kaito glanced at Aiko's retreating figure, then back at Hana. She's a good friend, he said carefully. She's helped me a lot lately. Hana nodded, her smile faint. I see. Before Kaito could say more, the bell rang, signaling the start of class. Hana gave him a quick wave and walked off, leaving him standing by his locker with a strange mix of emotions swirling in his chest. The day unfolded uneventfully until lunch. As usual, Kaito found himself on the rooftop, his sketchbook open in front of him. He expected Aiko to arrive soon. She always had a knack for making her presence known. Sure enough, a burst of pink appeared as the rooftop door swung open. Guess who brought snacks? Aiko declared triumphantly, holding up a bag of chips and 2 cans of soda. She strode over to Kaito, plopped down beside him, and handed him a can. Thanks, Kaito said, setting down his pencil. He couldn't help but notice how natural it had become to share these moments with her. Despite the odd looks they got from their classmates, Aiko never seemed to care. Her presence had become a constant he hadn't realized he'd come to rely on. So, she began, ripping open the chips and offering him some. What are you working on today? Kaito tilted the sketchbook to show her. It was a landscape, capturing the view from the rooftop in soft pencil strokes. Aiko leaned in closer, her shoulder brushing against his, and studied the drawing with an exaggerated seriousness. Very impressive, she said, nodding. But it's missing something. Kaito raised an eyebrow. Oh, and what's that? Me, of course, she said with a grin, posing dramatically. Imagine it, the great Aiko standing heroically on the rooftop. It would be a masterpiece. Kaito snorted, shaking his head. You're impossible. Impossible? No, Kaito. I'm inspiring, she teased, giving him a playful nudge. Kaito's laugh caught in his throat as he felt a strange flutter in his chest. He turned back to his sketchbook, trying to focus on the lines, but his mind was elsewhere. Aiko's energy, her confidence, and her unwavering attention made him feel something unfamiliar, something he wasn't sure how to define. Hey, Aiko said, breaking his thoughts. You okay? You've been quiet. I'm fine, Kaito said quickly, though his voice lacked conviction. Aiko tilted her head, her gaze softening. You know, you don't always have to say you're fine. If something's bothering you, you can tell me. I'm not going anywhere. The sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. He glanced at her, meeting her bright blue eyes, and found it difficult to look away. There was no judgment in her expression, no impatience, just a quiet understanding that felt almost overwhelming. It's just, Kaito hesitated, his fingers tightening around his pencil. I'm not used to this. This? Aiko repeated, her tone gentle. What do you mean? This, you someone, actually wanting to be around me. It's new, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Aiko's expression softened further. Kaito, she said quietly, leaning a little closer. You're worth being around, Aiko. I don't know what made you think otherwise, but you matter to me. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and meaningful. Kaito's chest tightened, a mix of gratitude and confusion swirling inside him. He wanted to believe her, but years of feeling overlooked made it hard to fully accept. Thanks, he said finally, his voice steadier than he felt. That means a lot. It's the truth, Aiko said, flashing him a warm smile. And don't forget it. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink to just the two of them. The soft rustle of the wind and the distant hum of the school faded into the background. Kaito wasn't sure how long they sat there, the silence between them no longer awkward, but charged with something he couldn't quite name. Aiko broke the moment with a laugh, leaning back on her hands. Anyway, back to the important question. When are you adding me to your masterpiece? Kaito rolled his eyes, though a small smile tugged at his lips. I'll think about it. You'd better, she said with mock sternness, tossing a chip at him. As the conversation shifted back to lighthearted banter, Kaito felt a flicker of something new, a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, he could let someone in without fear of being hurt again. Aiko was proving to him that taking that chance might not be so bad after all. As the afternoon breeze swept across the rooftop, Kaito and Aiko finished their snacks, the sunlight beginning to soften as the day edged toward its end. They lingered in the quiet warmth of their shared space, laughing over Aiko's exaggerated stories of getting lost in her new neighborhood. Okay, okay, Kaito said, shaking his head as Aiko recounted yet another ridiculous anecdote. There's no way you ended up in a karaoke bar by accident. I swear, Aiko protested, hands raised in mock defense. I just followed the signs, and somehow I ended up in a room with a microphone and a very confused group of strangers. But they were nice, and my rendition of Fly Me to the Moon wasn't terrible. Kaito chuckled, shaking his head. You're unbelievable. I know, she said with a wink, standing up and brushing off her skirt. And you wouldn't have it any other way. Kaito smirked, tucking his sketchbook into his bag and rising to join her. Debatable. Aiko grinned, sticking her tongue out at him as she started toward the rooftop door. Let's get going before you say something that hurts my feelings. Kaito followed, the easy banter between them settling into a comfortable rhythm. As they reached the stairwell, Aiko turned to glance at him over her shoulder, her pink ponytail swaying. You know, you're a lot more fun than you give yourself credit for. Is that so? Kaito said, raising an eyebrow. Absolutely, Aiko said, giving him a playful nudge as they began descending the stairs. But as they reached the third step, Aiko's foot slipped on the smooth surface. Whoa! Her arms flailed as she lost her balance, her body tilting backward. Kaito reacted instinctively, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward him. The momentum sent them both stumbling, and before he could steady himself, they tumbled to the landing together. When the dust settled, Kaito found himself lying on his back, with Aiko sprawled on top of him. Her face was inches from his, her wide blue eyes blinking in surprise. For a moment neither of them moved, the world seeming to pause as their breaths mingled in the small space between them. Aiko began, her voice barely audible. Are you okay? Yeah, Kaito said, his voice hoarse. You? She nodded, her cheeks turning a vivid shade of pink. Yeah, thanks for, catching me. Kaito's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing as he registered just how close they were. The warmth of her body, the faint scent of her floral shampoo, it was all overwhelming. You're heavier than you look, he said, attempting to lighten the mood, though his voice came out shakier than he intended. Aiko gasped, feigning offense. Excuse me? Despite her mock indignation, her lips twitched into a smile. She pushed herself up, giving him some breathing room, but still remaining close enough that he could see the faint freckles on her nose. You're lucky I like you, she said, her tone teasing but her eyes soft. Kaito swallowed hard, his gaze flicking to hers. I like you too. The words slipped out before he could stop them, and his face immediately turned red. Aiko's eyes widened slightly, her expression unreadable for a moment before she broke into a gentle laugh. Well, I should hope so, she said, her voice light. After all, you're stuck with me, remember? She extended a hand to help him up, and Kaito hesitated only briefly before taking it. Once they were both standing, the tension from their fall began to dissolve, replaced by the familiar comfort of their banter. You should really be more careful, Kaito said, brushing off his clothes. I can't always be around to save you. Aiko grinned, poking his arm. Oh, please, admit it, you liked playing the hero. Hardly, Kaito said, though his faint smile betrayed him. As they exited the stairwell and stepped into the hallway, Aiko glanced at him, her expression softer than usual. Thanks again, Kaito. Really. He met her gaze, the warmth in her eyes making his chest tighten in a way he couldn't quite explain. Anytime. As they walked toward their next class, side by side, Kaito couldn't shake the feeling that something between them had shifted, subtly but undeniably, and for once, he wasn't entirely sure he minded. The final bell rang, and the school corridors filled with the chaotic shuffle of students eager to leave. Kaito stood by his locker, carefully packing his books into his bag. Ren, as usual, leaned casually against the neighboring lockers, tossing his basketball from hand to hand. What's the plan, man? Ren asked, a sly grin spreading across his face. Snacks and basketball? Or are we just going to sit around while you sketch in moody silence? Kaito smirked faintly. Probably just heading home. Boring, Ren teased, but his tone lacked bite. Before Kaito could respond, Aiko's familiar voice rang out. Hey, Kaito, Ren! The two turned to see Aiko jogging toward them, her pink ponytail with each step. She slowed to a stop in front of them, slightly out of breath but grinning as always. Am I interrupting? She asked, her gaze flicking between them. Not at all, Ren said quickly, his grin widening. What's up, Aiko? I was going to grab some snacks from the convenience store and then head to the park. I thought Kaito might want to join me, she said, her bright blue eyes fixed on Kaito. Ren raised an eyebrow. Just Kaito? Ouch! Aiko rolled her eyes playfully. You can come too, Ren. I wouldn't want you to feel left out. Now that's more like it, Ren said, slinging his bag over his shoulder. Let's go. As the three headed out of the school gates, Hana emerged from a nearby classroom, her golden hair catching the sunlight. Her smile faltered slightly when she saw them together. Heading out? Hana asked, her tone light, but with an edge of hesitation. Yeah, Kaito said. We're going to grab snacks and hang out at the park. Hana hesitated, glancing at Aiko before smiling faintly. Sounds fun? Maybe another time? You should come, Aiko offered, her tone genuinely friendly. The more, the merrier. Hana shook her head, her smile tightening. Thanks, but I've got something to do. You guys have fun. Ren watched Hana walk away, his grin fading for a moment. Then he turned back to the others. Well, her loss. At the convenience store, Ren took charge of snack selection, dramatically debating between two brands of chips while Kaito and Aiko exchanged amused glances. You'd think he was picking wine for a dinner party, Aiko whispered, leaning toward Kaito. He takes his snacks seriously, Kaito replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. After much deliberation, Ren returned with a mountain of chips, candy, and drinks. Behold the perfect selection. The trio made their way to the park, settling under a large tree near the lake. Aiko spread out a blanket she had brought, and they unpacked the snacks, quickly falling into easy conversation. Ren regaled them with exaggerated stories from gym class, while Aiko chimed in with tales from her old school, her animated gestures making Kaito laugh more than he had in weeks. At one point, Aiko pulled out her phone and grinned. Okay, group photo time. No objections. Ren groaned dramatically. Do we have to? Yes, Aiko said firmly, waving her phone. Kaito, back me up here. Kaito shrugged. It's fine with me. See? Majority rules, Aiko said, sticking out her tongue at Ren. She positioned them under the tree, holding her phone out at arm's length. Smile? Ren made a silly face. Kaito managed a small but genuine smile, and Aiko beamed brightly. After snapping a few shots, she flipped through them and showed the boys. Not bad, she said. I'll send these to you. You should frame them, Ren joked. Put one on your desk, Kaito, a memento of this life-changing day. Kaito rolled his eyes but found himself chuckling. Yeah, sure. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the three began packing up. Aiko stood and stretched, her pink ponytail swaying. That was fun. We should do this more often. Agreed, Ren said. But next time, I'm in charge of snacks. You'd probably bring an entire grocery cart, Aiko teased. As they walked toward the park exit, Aiko stumbled on an uneven patch of ground. Kaito instinctively reached out, catching her arm before she could fall. For a moment, their eyes met, and Aiko's cheeks turned a faint shade of pink. Thanks, she said softly, her usual confidence replaced with a touch of shyness. Kaito let go of her arm, his own face slightly flushed. Just be careful. Ren watched the exchange with a knowing smirk but chose not to comment, instead walking ahead to give them space. That evening, as Kaito lay in bed, he stared at his phone. Aiko had sent the group photos, along with a cheerful message. Aiko, best day ever. Let's do it again soon. Kaito stared at the picture of the three of them, their smiles framed by the soft light filtering through the tree. For the first time in weeks, he felt a genuine warmth in his chest. Aiko's energy and kindness were changing something in him, something he hadn't realized needed to be changed. But as his thoughts drifted, the image of Hana walking away earlier flashed in his mind. The smile she had worn seemed forced, her eyes shadowed by something he couldn't quite place. A knot tightened in his chest as he closed his eyes, torn between the present and the lingering ties of the past.